Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, preparations are underway for the next episode of Behold, the Tribunal. I initially titled that video RPG Venn Diagram, but that's going to be the real official name of Scott and Jason and Sam and I as we talk about all kinds of subjects and try not to kill each other. We were very nice to each other the first time. But I mentioned something in that video, and it was a video that I tried to make, and so I'm going to try to make it again, having a little bit more information, or maybe had a little more time to mull around it. And this is the Fruitful Void. You know, my friend Eloy talks about the Fruitful Void. I'm not sure if he made that up, if he did or didn't. He probably stole it from someplace else, doesn't really matter. It's the idea that, you know, any role-playing game has some areas where it is silent. It simply does not have rules or procedures, or just simply doesn't talk about something that the players could do. And just like no plan can really survive contact with the players, I believe no role-playing game or set of rules can survive contact with the players either, because, you know, players being players, we start to say, I want to do something that's just not covered by the game at all. And some games have a very large void, or expanse where it's silent, and some games have a smaller one. But no matter what game it is, there are parts of that game where it's simply silent. It doesn't say anything about what they just said they wanted to do. And so, as a game master, we are called upon to inhabit that fruitful void with our interpretations. You know, how should things go here? Do we need to modify a rule? Do we need to take an existing rule and modify it to fit the situation? Do we need to figure out something else? Do we need to consult our own stack of invisible rule books? I've been reading this blog. It's really kind of cool. Hopefully I will link it below. It's called Rolltop Indigo, and it's at blogspot.com. And it's S. John Ross, and he has a series. He's a little RPG lexicon he's working on for his own project or whatever, but he talks about having visible and invisible rule books. The idea that, you know, there are the actual real concrete rule books you can pick up, or if it's a PDF, I suppose you just read on your tablet or whatever. But then there's the invisible rule books that we all kind of bring to the table. Rule books like the, you know, how do firearms really work? And here's the danger, or the thing you have to watch out for. And this is not a new concept, but it's just something to be aware of. That, you know, when you're populating that fruitful void, the players may not like the fruit that you bring to the table. You may bring a banana, and they really might have wanted a strawberry, and you haven't yet compromised on the kiwi. Silly example, but you get the point. Your set of invisible rule books, to steal this from S. John Ross, you know, blatantly, you know, may not coincide with theirs. You know, how firearms actually work. You know, you two may have a completely different idea of how this is actually supposed to happen. It's also possible that as you populate that that fruitful void, that you may place a greater weight on things like verisimilitude or realism than the players, who may be more interested in genre and, you know, preserving that sort of genre. This is one of those reasons it's very important to talk to the players. I've noticed, though, that, you know, when you come to the table as a player, we all come to the table with some sort of expectations, and a very wise person once told me that expectations are merely premeditated resentments. So this is one of those reasons it's really important to talk to each other, you know, in the beginning. You know, have that session zero where we kind of lay our cards on the table and talk about, like, what kind of game, what kind of feel do we want to have. But you might also want to start talking about that fruitful void that the game has, like how are we planning to adjudicate stuff here. Not that the players need to give the game master a list of demands, but, you know, as a game master, sometimes you need to be kind of clear. You know, here's how I think I'm going to be handling some situations. But these situations, being what they are unexpected, and players will often throw us a curveball. That's why it's, I believe, important to talk in between games, have kind of those post-game reflections. You don't have to make videos like I do, but the idea that you talk to each other and say, hey, this really worked for me, this didn't work for me. I think we're having some kind of schism between our expectations here. Because sometimes players will come to the table with expectations of a certain amount of agency, or a certain feel, or you get the idea. The certain level of transparency in terms of, like, well, why did you choose to handle the situation in this manner? And so we need to talk to each other and come to some kind of consensus with that. You know, fortunately, I believe, for the most part, if you get together with quality people and you talk to each other and you behave in a mature fashion, you can avoid a lot of the major controversy. But even when you have players that, you know, are really, you know, friendly, like each other, willing to talk, you know, I've had experiences recently where we've kind of populated that fruitful void with things that the other player said, I think I would have done this a little bit differently. And of course, that is one of the dangers of playing with other game masters, which I like to do. is that, you know, I've talked about this before, we all have GM disease to a certain extent, where it's very difficult to kind of relinquish control of that fruitful void, if you will. And we always, you know, tend to look at what the other game master is doing, and every once in a while think to ourselves, man, I would have handled that a little bit differently. I don't know if you can relate, but I certainly have had that happen. So that's one of those things that I like the fruitful void. I like the creative part of the hobby. I don't mind rules, but I like to have the opportunity to be creative. You know, I enjoy that part of the game. I enjoy the fact that it's not a board game, and that, you know, we step out and we confound each other as players, and, you know, the game master has to scramble and figure out, how do I adjudicate this? Fortunately, if we've thought about it, if we've talked, if we've examined the existing rules, if we've thought about what the genre itself is, and how the game should feel, it becomes easier and easier over time to do a pretty good job with our invisible rule books and filling up that fruitful void with things that make sense and can keep the game going in a smooth fashion. But it's always something to be cognizant about and aware of, and to talk to each other about in terms of that fruitful void, and making sure that we don't end up, you know, having some resentments with each other, especially if they're unspoken ones. You know, there's nothing worse than a player that leaves the table and just doesn't tell people why. You know, it's better to talk to each other. So, same old G, still right. You know, talk to the players, play the right game, don't be a jerk. Talk to the players. That's it, kids. Have a good weekend.